Hi YouTube. I thought I might just jump on board and make a video on how to be extremely unpopular on social media, because I want to address the elephant in the room that comes to light at this time of the year, being a week out from the end of October. So let us begin. So this time of the year tends to cause a great deal of confusion amongst modern pagans, or the pagan community, or the witchcraft community, whatever you want to call it these days, especially here in the Southern Hemisphere. And it's increasing, and it's coming to light because a lot of our social media feeds are now being swamped with Northern Hemispheric stuff. And at this time of the year, it's all about getting your witch on. How spooky can you be, because it's the witching time of the year. So we have to dust off the black pointed hats and drag out the orange pumpkins and run around, I don't know, trick-and-treating and throwing fake cobwebs everywhere with spiders in them. And yes, I'm being sarcastic because I said it comes every year, and there seems to be no end in sight as to the dilemma. Do we do Bealtaine? Do we do Halloween? Do we go trick-or-treating? Am I allowed to go trick-or-treating? And what about Samhain? And what do we call this and what do we call that? And especially in the last, I don't know, 10 years, maybe it's only been the last 10 years that I've really paid attention to it. Normal media and the shops have really seen this as a way to get people to spend their money. So even from the beginning of the month, if not before, of COVID, we were starting to see horrendously disgusting orange plastic jack-o'-lantern type buckets and all the stereotypical stuff that witches should be looking like, with the pointed hats and the sexy little black skirts and the green face paint and the ghosts and everything. And yeah, I get a bit bored with it. But it's this dilemma that newcomers to the craft or paganism, that's, again, it seems to be getting, I won't say worse, but we have so many self-proclaimed experts these days on social media, and also this belief that anything goes, do what you feel. And I think this is sort of adding to any dilemmas that people have. And while I'm not here to lecture anybody as to how they practice their craft, being a bit of a traditionalist, being a bit older, I guess, being around the block a few times, and one of the reasons why, and this is going to be a blatant plug, I write contemporary witchcraft, is because a lot of the self-taught, or if you taught via asking people on Facebook or social media or TikTok videos, etc., they do not actually give you a foundational level of knowledge and understanding upon which you're building your craft upon. And that's not really good English, but I think you know what I mean. And this problem or issue that I've been noticing over the last, I don't know, 10 years is really becoming more and more of a problem. Maybe people aren't seeing it as a problem, but when we're getting the same sort of questions, repeating the same answers, do what you want, it's all, you know, you do whatever you feel, that's actually isn't constructive in helping a beginner. Because I suppose having an interest in psychology and real boring stuff like that, foundational materials, in order for you to do what you want and do what you feel, you have to know what you're doing to start off with. It's a bit like putting the cart before the horse. And these people who say, well, anything goes, often don't understand the processes themselves, because in their embrace of freedom, and I'm not knocking it, but they've sort of snubbed their nose up at traditional, anything traditional. And in doing that, it's like a double-edged sword. It's like, when you build your house, you need to prepare the ground and make the concrete and the cement and pour it and wait for it to cure, and then you can build your house any way you want to. However, they don't want to do any of that, so they've just got a little tent or lean-to and they're just pitching it. And it's fine when everything is fine and dandy, but you get a bit of wind or shaky ground or torrential rain, and then you don't know where to go because you find that your house has been demolished. So probably not exactly a good analogy, but trying to get back to this understanding some of the foundational work. And when it comes to the seasonal wheel of the year, the Sabbaths, especially in this time of the year, and especially when you live, say, in the Southern Hemisphere where we have to do everything differently, knowing a little bit of the basics first can actually help you decide whether or not you do the Northern Hemisphere or Southern Hemisphere way. As I said, I'm not here to preach, I'm just here to maybe help you with a little bit of the foundational materials. I have written some notes. I don't know where I'm going to go with that, but I find it interesting because, as I said, the thumbing of the nose at anything traditional, yet it is, and another shameless plug of something else I've written, Dance in the Sacred Wheel. This is an old copy. This wheel here with the 8 Sabbaths didn't miraculously appear out of nowhere. No culture or peoples actually observed all 8 Sabbaths or seasonal festivals as we know today. Okay. There have been peoples and cultures that observe probably the equinoxes or the solstices, or maybe both the equinoxes and solstices. But when it came to that's the connection between the earth and the cosmos, the sun, that sort of thing. But when it came to the agricultural festivals, which we call the greater Sabbaths, which are Imbolc, Bealtaine, Lunasa or Lamasa or Lamas, and Samhain. These are, in my tradition, called the gateways to the seasons. They are agricultural festivals, and there are reasons behind them. In particular, if we're looking at Samhain, Samhain's the last of the 3 harvest festivals, so the harvest was over. It was a time for celebration. It was also the blood festival, because this is the harvest of the animals, the livestock, to keep their people, the tribes, the community alive during the winter. Now, in our modern world, we can go down to the supermarket, so we don't need to worry about those things. But knowing a little bit about the seasonal festivals can help you, especially when you live in another hemisphere, ascertain what it actually means and how does it actually reflect the environment that you live in now. Well, at least that's how I was taught from my craft. So we're not at the gateway to winter. We're actually at the gateway to summer, the other side of the wheel. The temperature is heating up. The animals and the insects are becoming more active. My garden is erupting with flowers. So things are really beginning to move and fast and not slowing down. The energies are beginning to quicken. And this is Bealtaine. This is all the fertility of the Lord and Lady, the maypole, that sort of celebration, the sensuality, the sexuality, those erotic energies beginning to peak. So to me, it doesn't make sense of bringing that energy down for Samhain. Now we get onto the issue of Halloween, trick-or-treating, and I'm going to try and not roll my eyes too much about the commercialism that we see today. And I do know for those of us who have Anglo or Scottish or Irish ancestry, yes, there has been an argument that our ancestors would have brought out these folk customs with them when they left the homeland, as they did in the Northern Hemisphere. And that I don't disagree, because where I live in South Australia, up in the Adelaide Hills, we've got a lot of Germanic towns, and they do celebrate from time to time the Germanic roots. So yes, so my ancestors, who were a mixture of Anglo and also Scots, would have brought out some of their folklore to their new lands with them as well. Whether it still stays the same, that's another thing completely, entirely, because we've even seen over here that the church, even though holidays such as Easter and Christmas haven't changed, over here the Harvest Festival happens in March, April, and not in August, September as it does in the Northern Hemisphere. So things are changing a little bit to the hemispheres. So I just want to do a little bit of a sort of a disclaimer, not really a disclaimer, but a little bit of a background as to why I get a little pedantic about these subjects. And it stems back from, I have a very logical mind. I also have a legal background. And back in, say, the late 90s, early 2000s, I was involved with a pagan organisation here, for want of a better word, and at that time actually involved with a number of government departments and organisations, in particular the police, when it came to the Offensive Weapons Act, when they were looking at knife laws, and did a lot of work with them, and also did a lot of work with the Attorney General's Department when it came to religious vilification and discrimination acts, both locally on a state level and also federally. Now, my information could be a little bit dated, or is a bit dated. It may have changed a little bit. I don't think so. It's been a while since I've actually checked on the legislations. But as far as I'm aware, South Australia still does not have any legislation that protects any person from religious vilification or discrimination. The reason for that was when they put it out to the people, the Christian churches jumped up and down and said that would actually be discrimination against them, because that would actually prevent them from going around fantasizing everybody as they do. So we don't have that. Australia is not like America, where religious freedom is not written in our constitution. It's just assumed. And this is one of the major differences that people tend to forget. I think in America it's written in their constitution. We don't have that. We don't have any legal description or interpretation as to what a religion is, save for one case that I'm aware of. There may be others now, but back in the day there's only one case, and love them or loathe them, it was in relation to the Church of Scientology, and the legislation was in relation to taxation laws, because they were trying to get an exemption like all the other churches when it came to taxation. And I think they won, but it actually forced the courts to put in legislation a description of what a religion is. And I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's that sort of background that I come from. So knowing your material, being authentic and being accurate in your information, because in dealing with the police, it was a really interesting, one of the things that I was told was, especially in relation to, he said, cult or edge of society, the edge of norms, we're dealing with some of it probably from more of a Christian-based angle, belief systems such as paganism or witchcraft or whatever umbrella you want to go under. It's important to be able to prove, I guess, or justify that it's something serious and bona fide and real, as opposed to a hobby. So this is the angle that I'm coming from when I look at my craft, when I look at my practice, that and the fact that I do research and write. So facts and figures sort of matter to me. So when it comes to dressing up and pretending to be a witch for the sake of some commercially insensitive festival that really has no connection with my interpretation of the craft or my connection with the land, it doesn't sort of make sense to me, especially when a lot of the props are less than or not environmentally friendly at all. So I'm looking at the plastic buckets painted as jack-o'-lanterns and things like that. We don't know so much this year because of COVID, but I know a few years ago we were even importing those big orange pumpkins because I think they're actually a squash. I don't know if they're actually a true pumpkin, because that's what America has, and our pumpkin season, of course, is March, April, so it's completely wrong. There are a lot of other things that, for me personally, do not add up. So I personally do not go trick-or-treating. I never have. I'm probably a killjoy, so be it. It's not a time that, sugar's bad for you. Anyway, it's almost like this sort of environmental connection that back in the 90s, 2000s, that we were really big on has disappeared. And a lot of the focus now seems to have shifted to aesthetics. People want, and to me, in my mindset, that's this play aspect. And again, I come back to, when I see that happening, I come back to what the police officer said to me. If you want to be considered serious, if you want your beliefs to be viewed serious, then it needs to be portrayed as something serious and not a hobby or something, a fad. So yes, I'm a killjoy when it comes to Halloween at this time of the year, unfortunately. But I'm sort of getting a little bit off track. If you want to get out there trick-or-treating, you're entirely okay with it. That's fine. That's entirely up to you. Just know what it is you're trick-or-treating about. Know something about the history. So what I thought I would do, share with you some books from my ever-increasing collection. I don't know, I'll start with this one first, because I've got a lot of modern paganism, witchcraft, druidry even, stems from the Golden Bough. This is one version of it, an abridged version of Sir James Fraser, hard reading. And if you're looking for anything on Samhain or Bealtaine, you're looking in the fire festivals of Europe, and he goes on about the Halloween fires all around Europe and in the British Isles in particular. Another book that I found, and I don't know where it came from, it's this little one called Scottish Folklore. And it might have been picked up in my travels, but they do mention Samhain. They call it the Festival of the Dead. They've got that under brackets underneath it is the autumn equinox or November. On the other side, under Christian festivals, like the Christian equivalent, they've got Hallow's Mass, Halloween's All Saints' Day, 31st of October. Then they've got this little entry. They don't actually mention Bealtaine, but Halloween, the Feast of All Saints, leading to All Hallows' Day, 31st of October to the 1st of November, was a Celtic feast of the dead. It marked the coming of the winter, when the ritual fires were lit to propitiate, say a word, how I pronounce it wrong, the sun, and purified the land and its creatures. In Scotland it developed as the Feast of the Witches, and as such the poet Robert Burns made good use of its folklore in his verses. There were all symbols of pagan feasting in Scotland, from divination with nuts to donking of apples, apples being sacred to the Druids, and the most potent symbol of all, turnip lanterns. Not big, honking, great orange pumpkins, but turnip lanterns, a direct descendant of the pagan fashion of placing skulls of the dead on poles around encampments to drive away evil. Bonfires have been an important element of Scottish feasting for centuries, in remembrance of how pagan forefathers first lit a blaze on top of hills to encourage the sun to return. So every time you want to hollow out a pumpkin, which really should be a turnip, I'm thinking about the turnips that we get around over here. I can't remember if I've actually seen a turnip. We've got little ones, but if I've seen one recently, again, they are a root vegetable. Most root vegetables seem to come to the forefront in autumn, and are descended from placing skulls of the dead onto poles. Quite interesting. Next book is an Almanac of Folklore by Charles Knightley. And again, he talks about Halloween, the 31st of October, as Winter's Eve, the last night of the Celtic year and the uncanniest season of the whole calendar. The night of the dead, when the ghosts of the departed revisit the earth and witches and evil spirits wield their greatest power. The fairy court rides out at midnight, and only at this precise moment may those kidnapped by the good folk be saved by their lovers. And bonfires should be lit on the hills to drive off witches, and on no account should the household fire go out tonight, or evil things may gain entry. Sounds exciting, except for we're coming into bushfire season, so we shouldn't be lighting any bonfires on top of hills. Another book I thought I would share, and I do love it when I come across ex-library books. This is the Oxford Companion to the Year, and I used it when I was writing Dancing the Sacred Wheel, and it talks about the 30th of October, 31st of October, all across Europe, different associations with All Hallows Eve, the eve before Old Saints' Day. In Scotland and Ireland, Hallowe'en, a night when spirits walked abroad. First day of winter being the 1st of November, taken to begin at nightfall. Originally the entire day from sunset on the 31st of October till sunset on the 1st of November belonged to the spirits, but the emphasis shifted to the night. In this form the observance passed to Wales and Cornwall and to the border areas of England, as witness the souling or cake begging rhyme of Knutsford of the Welsh border, and the rhyme goes, soul, soul, for a soul cake, I pray good missus, a soul cake, a pear, apple or pear or plum or cherry, any good thing to make us merry. 1 for Peter, 2 for Paul, 3 for him that made us all. Up with the kettle and up with the pan, give us good alms and we'll be gone. And then Halloween crossed over to North America with the Scots and the Irish. Despite objections from the Christian clergy of its diabolical characteristics, it's become the chief non-sectarian children's festival, a virtual feast of obligation for parents who complain when other commitments are scheduled to conflict with it. And again, there's a mention of Robert Burns. For those of us living south of the equator, there is one book that tends to get overlooked. We tend to focus sometimes on more American books than Australian books, which is rather disappointing considering there's more of us Australian authors, or some Southern Hemispheric authors, I'll get the words out, writing these days, which is fantastic. Witchcraft and Paganism in Australia by Lynn Hume. If you don't have it and you live in Australia, I would strongly recommend you track it down. I don't know if it's still in print because my copy was printed in 1997. It was through the University of Melbourne University Press. Contact them, get it republished if it hasn't been published anymore, because this is our version of Margaret Adler's, whatever her book in America was that everybody seems to recommend. And it's really interesting because Lynn talked to a lot of groups at the time and said, maybe a little bit dated, but there's still a lot of information. In particular, this passage that I'm going to share with you that comes under rites of passage, where she talks about how some of the pagans or witches at the time talked about working on this land. And I think that's really important when it comes to understanding whether or not to stick to the Northern Hemisphere way or try the Southern Hemispheric way. She mentions, fertile times in Australia are from March to May. In June and July, the earth is preparing itself for the blossoming of spring, which occurs in the late July and August, when native plants flower and birds start gathering nesting materials. The height of spring is in September, petering out at the end of October or the mid of November, when the sun begins to increase its intense heat. So if we look at the earth and what is happening regionally, a different pattern unfolds. The Northern Hemisphere myth of the year fits uncomfortably with the people who are attuned to the environment. It is basically a difference between working with the earth forces and working with the dance of the sun and the moon. Some feel that a Mediterranean myth cycle of return would be more appropriate for Australia. Because of this misfit, some pagans feel that a myth could be created, one that fits in with what is happening both in the sky, the pattern of the sun's direction, and the earth forces. Australia is a land of extremes, of relentless hot, scorching sun bringing drought and sudden electrical storms and torrential downpours bringing floods. In some areas it is tropical rainforest, and in others cold, snowy climates. So volatile gods and goddesses are thought to preside here. One suggestion is to look towards Aboriginal spirituality for guidance. However, to make the picture more complicated by a curious irony, many Aboriginal myths depict the sun as a woman and the earth as male. So we are sort of left to work things out for ourselves. So I guess even for grumpy old pagans like myself, if you want to go trick-or-treating, if you want to dress up as a witch, why not bring a bit of accuracy to it? Why not dress up as a witch, but not one from Wicked with the green face painting, with how much we like that movie or the stage show, but a historical character. And it's quite interesting because when I first Googled the first witch to be persecuted or hung for witchcraft, the name that came up was Bridget Bishop, which, yes, in a way she was the first witch to be hung, but in the Salem witch trials, not all over the world. She wasn't the first, just the first in America. And this is almost sort of, I don't know, again, enforces just how Americanized we're becoming, or how even like Google thinks that everything's revolving around America. And I do apologize to Americans, but if you're watching this, but you're not the first for everything. The first person, according to Google or Wikipedia, to be accused and persecuted for witchcraft was Theonis of Lemos in round about 323 BCE in ancient Greece. Then we move to the Han Dynasty in China with Liu Ju in, my Chinese is non-existent, 91 BCE. If you want to dress up as a witch a little bit more recent, how about Lady Janice Glamis, died in 1537 Scotland. Angus Waterhouse, 1566 in England. Gilles Garnier in 1573 France. Thomas Daltrey in 1578 England. Got a bit of a list here. Agnes Sampson, 1591 in Scotland. Bridget Bishop, who I mentioned before, 1692. And there were other people, even in America, who were persecuted for witchcraft before Bridget Bishop. Margaret Jones, Mary Johnson, I think it's Alice Lake, and even according to Wikipedia, there's probably been others since September 2020. Ahmad Kilsan Hassan in Somalia was the last person, according to Wikipedia, who lost their lives for practicing or being accused as a witch. So if you want to go trick-or-treating, why not honour one of them, the little nameplate, as opposed to the Green Witch. Anyway, I think that's enough of Francis being a grumpy old bag, and if you're going to go trick-or-treating, please don't come to my house. But enjoy it, I guess. I'm going to be dancing around maypoles. Okay, blessings.